Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we will continue. Let me introduce our speakers for this panel. First of all, Ellie Cohanim, Senior Fellow at the Independence Women's Forum, former U.S. Deputy Special Envoy to combat anti-Semitism from 2019 to 2021. Welcome, Ellie.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be with you.
And we have Daniel Flesch, Senior Policy Analyst for Middle East and North Africa in Allison Center for National Security at the Heritage Foundation. Daniel, glad to be with you here. Okay, and of course we have Peter Jeffele, who is already here for a whole day, was very active during the panels, Policy Director at the Wilfred Martin Center for European Studies. So without any long introductions from my part, the essence of this panel is to discuss the geopolitical and political aspects of current contemporary anti-Semitism. And I would like to give a floor to Ellie Cohanim, who quite unfortunately, but will have to leave quite early after a couple of minutes. So we will have, we will hear an opening statement from Ellie Cohanim, after which she will leave the panel, but we'll definitely continue with our panel with Daniel and Peter. So Ellie, we've discussed about the content of our panel, starting from the Abraham Accords, of course, on which you were personally involved, and going on with the Middle East and the Middle East and North African immigration to Europe, and how that what kind of challenges that raises to the political anti-Semitism. So what would be your take on this current state of where we are on the political and geopolitical aspects of anti-Semitism? Ellie.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank you and thank the conference organizers for inviting me and to say hello to my esteemed co-panelists. I'm very honored to share the panel with you, each of you. And to the point that you made, I want to first talk a little bit about the Abraham Accords before I get to what I think is the tougher part of this conversation. As you mentioned, I had the honor and privilege of serving under President Donald Trump as the U.S. Deputy Special Envoy to Monitor and Combat Anti-Semitism at the State Department. And when we came into office under the Trump presidency, we didn't know where we would be at the end of the 4 years in the term. And where we were eventually was the signing of the Abraham Accords on the White House lawn, which is a day that I will never forget. But as part of my portfolio, I wound up having the privilege of being on that, what we called the Warm Peace team. And the reason why we called it the Warm Peace is that eventually when we did get to that signing of the Abraham Accords, what it did was that it created a warm peace between Israel and her Arab neighbors, the United Arab Emirates, the Kingdom of Bahrain, the Kingdom of Morocco, in contrast to kind of the cold peace deals that existed between Israel and Jordan and Israel and Egypt. And so, as I mentioned, it was a journey that we were all on at the beginning, and we weren't quite sure that it would end in these peace deals. But I think it's a real testament to the Trump administration and their ability to kind of think outside of the box. President Trump, essentially what he did when he came into office was that he rejected what was considered kind of like the foreign policy elites and their expertise, which for years had been trying to move forward with some sort of Israeli-Palestinian peace deal. And we had seen so many American presidents get caught up in that over and over again. And unfortunately, we saw all of that kind of end in radical failures. And some of the difference in approach that President Trump and his team took, senior advisor Jared Kushner, which was very, very instrumental in making it all happen, and his team, was that again, they were willing to put on a brand new lens to the issues and just think outside of the box. And so number one, what that meant was that they stood with our ally Israel, and they let the Middle East and Israel's Arab neighbors know that Israel as a country is here to stay, and the United States will always stand behind Israel. And, this ties back into our conversation specifically on anti-Semitism, because so much of the anti-Semitism that we're experiencing in the world today is really anti-Zionism, right? It is the rejection of the very notion of a Jewish sovereign state in the Middle East. And the Trump administration was just very loud and bold in letting the rejectionists in the MENA region understand that Israel is here to stay. The whatever they want to call it, the Zionist entity, the Zionist enterprise, it's here to stay, and that the United States will forever have Israel's back. Israel will always enjoy that bilateral special relationship with the United States. And so, again, in linking that back into anti-Semitism, it's the most important thing that Western countries, that European allies can think of doing, is consistently giving that message to the rejectionists, the extremists in the Arab world, in the Muslim world, that that the Jewish state of Israel enjoys the support of Western Europe, of the European countries, of the United States. And so the sooner that the Arab world and the Muslim world move on to accept the Jewish presence, the state of Israel in the region, accept and work with and partner with that Jewish state, the sooner that they will all achieve, their own interests, right? And that's exactly what we've seen with the Abraham Accords, is that we've seen the United Arab Emirates, we've seen the Kingdom of Bahrain, Morocco, we've seen their personal interests, their nation state interests advance with their relationship with Israel, with the United States, and the Abraham Accords have now withstood the test of 17 months of war with Hamas right now, and Israel dismantling Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and taking on the Islamic Republic of Iran, right? It has withstood the test of this war brilliantly, I would say. And just this week, let's note that we saw joint military exercises out of Greece with Israel and a number of Arab countries. Very interesting development to always watch. So that's my piece about the Abraham Accords, and I think it's a topic that is really important for all of us to understand, because I'll say the last thing on that, what I've also seen and witnessed and experienced and become friends with is Arab Zionists. And this is an incredible development that we've seen out of the Arab world, is that now you've got Arab voices that are also advocating for the Jewish state of Israel. And this is just an incredible development. It's something that I think many of us hoped for our children's generation, and to see it play out in our own lives is really just the greatest light and optimism that could come out of a very troubled region. I also want to share real quick that I was born in Iran myself and fled in 1979 with my family. We fled the Islamic Revolution. And so this is a region that I know and understand really well. And again, I think that these new voices of Arab Zionism who are coming out to support Israel is a tremendous opportunity for all of us, and we should support them very much. Now to talk a little bit more about anti-Semitism in the European context. What I want to share is, I think, very tough words. All of us, the Jews around the world, but specifically in Europe and sadly in the United States under the previous administration and since October 7th, have experienced and what I've called an unprecedented tsunami of anti-Semitism, right? For many of us who've been working on these issues for years, sadly, we had been seeing trend lines, and unfortunately every year we'd see the trend lines going up, right? Increased anti-Semitic attitudes, increased anti-Semitic attacks. However, while that trend line was sadly always going up little bit by little bit every year, since October 7th, we see this skyrocket, right? 400% increases. And these are numbers that I think is hard for the brain to wrap around. And so while I am not an alarmist, I would say that we are perhaps looking at a time period perhaps similar to pre-World War II, pre-Shoah numbers. And again, I'm not an alarmist, but I think that it would also be rather remiss of all of us if we were not concerned by what we are experiencing today. And so when you look at what is happening right now with this dramatic, staggering, unprecedented, since we started to kind of track numbers, anti-Semitism, we cannot help but see this correlation between, what's happened specifically on the European continent, which is that Europe committed, an almost entire genocide of the Jewish people, killing 6 million Jews, 1 million of them children during the Shoah, during the Holocaust. And some 70 or 60 years later, they start, 75, I'm not going to put an exact number on it, but they start this immigration policy where now they have imported onto the European shores people who are bringing with them the most vitriolic, vile, anti-Semitic attitudes that they have been kind of brainwashed with from the time that they were children, practically with their mother's milk, this vitriolic Jew hatred that is found in these MENA countries, whether it's in their anti-Semitic curricula that's taught in the schools, whether it's some of the imams that are preaching in the mosques, whether it's anti-Semitic television shows that are broadcast during the month of Ramadan. We are seeing just, some of the most Jew-hating anti-Semitic ideas and conspiracy theories that are being taught in these Middle Eastern, North African countries, that Europe has imported these migrants onto their shores, which are bringing with them the most hateful anti-Semitic attitudes. And so what the Europeans have essentially done is, during the Holocaust, they committed an almost complete genocide of the Jewish people. And then they went about to import another set of people onto their shores who are bringing with them the most vile anti-Semitic attitudes. And then the Europeans seem to be failing at making any attempt at assimilating these very migrants that they've brought onto their shores. Now, every day I have to tell you, I see very, very concerning footage about the damage that these very migrants are doing to European society writ large. And the thing that's always important to understand, that Jews are always the canary in the coal mine. So Jews are always the first target, they're never the last target. In any society that allows anti-Semitism to flourish on its shores, it's asking for their own self-destruction. And so sadly for us, I feel very much, as I watch what's happening in Europe from my seat in the United States, I am concerned about a self-destruction in Europe. So I want to talk a little bit and really quickly, because I know my time is wrapping up, what can be done. The Trump administration right now, in less than 100 days, I think they are really showing what can be done. They're really leading the way on anti-Semitism. What they've done is they've brought a whole of government approach to this fight. And so that means everything from the Department of Education right now is pulling hundreds of millions of dollars from US universities that are under investigation for anti-Semitism. And I would say most importantly, perhaps for the European context, is the fact that the Trump administration is now revoking the visas of students who have come here from foreign countries who are now understood to be causing disruption in our society or participating in activities that support foreign terrorist organizations. And this is something that very much the Europeans can be replicating this model. And we know that the administration is in the process of deporting these students and also deporting people who are not students from the United States, who again are exhibiting support for foreign terrorist organizations. So I think that there is a lot that can be done. I think that all of us should feel empowered, but it does require holding our governments accountable, and it requires having tough conversations where we do not allow the fear of being labeled certain names, or fear of talking about things that are perhaps not politically correct. We cannot allow the fear of political correctness to get in the way of protecting Jews in our countries, but also really protecting our societies writ large. And so with that, I again thank you all for giving me this opportunity to address you. I'm going to hope that I can join you again another time, and perhaps it could be a bit more interactive. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Ellie. Thank you. So thank you for this very conceptual and thought-provoking keynote address, I must say, on which we will continue. Unfortunately, we'll definitely send you the video because we are recording everything, and we'll send you the whole video of the panel afterwards. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for spending us some valuable time. So till the next time, you are free to withdraw from our call. And now we have our team somewhere here, with which thank you, Ellie. Thank you. Okay, and we'll continue with our panel accordingly. So Ellie outlined couple of points at least on which we will proceed. Daniel, perhaps, well, Ellie jumps straight to the sort of the value of the Abraham Accords. Could you perhaps just give us a brief outline? What is the Abraham? What is the Abraham Accords? What are the essence of them? And what were the context just a couple of years ago that they were approved? And of course, what is the sort of a state of the Abraham Accords currently in this period of time that we are living now?
Well, certainly, and really do appreciate the invitation to speak today and be a part of this esteemed panel. And I have to say, with Ellie on the panel, who I've come to know pretty well over the past year, working on a number of anti-Semitism related issues here in the United States, it's really great to see her. So the Abraham Accords represent a divergent vision or a new vision for what is possible in the Middle East. It's a recognition by the countries of the Accords, obviously chief among them Israel, but for the Arab side, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and Morocco to begin with, a recognition that Israel is a solution and a partner for the future. I mean, historically, the focus in the Middle East, you talk about peace in the Middle East, or the Middle East conflict, what's it pertain to? It largely pertains to two views if you have. One is the larger view of the Arab-Israeli conflict, essentially the inability or unwillingness for the Arab countries to quote unquote normalize relations with Israel. This was broken, as Ellie mentioned, with Egypt in 1979 and then with Jordan in 1994. However, the other Arab countries obviously do not have formal relations with the state of Israel. And that's largely been because of a variety of reasons, but predominantly for the second reason of viewing of a conflict and why there's no peace in the Middle East is because of the Palestinians, the so-called Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And the belief has been, particularly in the American foreign policy establishment, has been that in order to achieve peace in the Middle East broadly, you have to first solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because somehow countries around the region and people around the region were always talking about the Palestinians, and they were not moving forward with their own futures and their own visions. Unless the Palestinian issues was resolved, essentially the Palestinians were granted statehood. Well, we know from history, from the last 25 plus years with the Oslo Accords, and even before then, the Palestinians are basically not interested in having a state. So when the Trump administration came into power in 2017, they did develop a plan for the Palestinians to get to statehood with the Israelis. However, that didn't come to fruition, as we saw with the Peace to Prosperity plan that the Trump administration issued forth. And then they went on a second track because you had Jared Kushner, David Friedman, and Jason Greenblatt, all senior leaders in the first Trump administration, along with Ellie Cohanim and others, who said, you know what, there's a different way to go about this, that actually the Palestinians are not central to other Arabs moving forward with their own countries, with their own visions and plans for the future. And instead of looking at the Palestinians, let's look at direct bilateral relations between Israel and some of these Arab countries. Because when you have the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and the UAE in particular, when they look at the future of their countries, what is Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, the head of Saudi Arabia, is he thinking about the Palestinians, or is he thinking about how to one day get off of petrochemicals as a natural export for his country? Or what's he thinking about with the threat across the Persian Gulf with Iran? And so in that view, you realize the Gulf countries can look to Israel not as, as an inhibitor of progress in the future, but actually as a partner and a solution for the future, because Israel provides numerous things for these countries. First and foremost, they provide security options for these countries, particularly against the threat of Iran. And we've seen this a lot over the last 18 months, which I can discuss. But also they provide an alternative to developing their own economies, because Israel, we must always remember, as a country not blessed with natural resources. It was only a few years ago that they discovered natural gas off the coast in the Mediterranean Sea. But Warren Buffett once said that if you want to go to the Middle East looking for oil, never go to Israel. But if you want to go to the Middle East looking for human capital, only go to Israel. And it's in that vein that these countries said, you know what? Israel is a solutions provider for the future. And it is good that most of these countries are not engaged in open conflict with Israel. They do not border Israel. The UAE was not a country, actually, when Israel was founded in 1948. But the Abraham Accords came about because we're looking for a new vision for the Middle East. And obviously, Bahrain, the UAE in particular, were able to sign up for the Accords with the blessing, essentially, of Saudi Arabia. And so the Accords is a normalization process, more of a people-to-people initiative versus kind of the government-to-government relations you have between Israel and Egypt and Israel and Jordan. So it's intended to be more of a warm peace versus the cold peace Israel has with its immediate neighbors. And through this, you have development of trade relations, of cultural ties, of tourism, et cetera, between, again, Israel, the UAE, Morocco, and Bahrain. And the idea is particularly, to expand the accords, to expand the circle of normalization between Israel and other Muslim countries more broadly. Indonesia, the largest Muslim country in the world, has been discussed as a potential partner in the Abraham Accords. Obviously, the big one is Saudi Arabia. And it was thought during the last administration that Saudi Arabia would normalize with Israel. That was never going to happen under Biden, but it's very much a possibility under President Trump during his second term now. And the question of Saudi Arabia has really been one of when, not if. Not if they will normalize with Israel, but when they will normalize with Israel. And getting kind of more to the current context with Israel's war with Iran, and it's a war with Iran of which Hamas is only one front of that multi-front war that Israel's facing with Iran. October 7th for Israel was a day of existential crisis. Not only the day itself, with the invasion and massacre of 1,200 Israelis in southern Israel and the abduction of over 250, including Americans, including some Europeans as well, into Gaza. But it was a question of if Hamas is able to take Israel by surprise and inflict as much damage as it did, what does that mean for Israel's own ability to defend its own borders? And could the IDF then defeat Hamas effectively, and also not to mention after October 8th, when Hezbollah from the north started firing rockets at Israel, could Israel essentially defeat itself against Iran's proxy network that's encircled its borders, its ring of fire? That question was very much in doubt the first few months, because for Saudi Arabia, as an example, if they're looking for help in a security context against the Iranians, and they were really going to Israel as the presumed preeminent military power in the region, but Israel's unable to defeat a small terror army like Hamas, then what good are they against the Iranians? That question has basically been put to bed, not only with Israel effectively, as Ellie mentioned, degrading and even dismantling Hamas in Gaza, but we know about the beeper attack against Hezbollah in Lebanon in September, taking out Hassan Nasrallah and the leadership of Hezbollah in Lebanon, striking back against the Houthis in Yemen. And of course, Iran twice, both last April and last October, launched the first ever direct attack from its country onto Israel with missile strikes, missile and drone in April, and over 190 ballistic missiles were launched in October against Israel, and Israel effectively shot down most of them. Some got through, certainly, but it was an incredible display, not only with Israel, but also the United States and other regional and European partners to shoot down this attack. And then in October, in response to that attack, Israel launched its own reprisal attack against Iran, in which it essentially took out Iran's air defenses. And in the most amazing feats, for 90 minutes or so, you had Israeli jets flying over Tehran uninhibited, with complete air supremacy. So the point here is that Israel is clearly the predominant military power in the region, and this bodes well for the Abraham Accords and for this alternative vision for the Middle East. I say alternative not as as an alternative to the common, but actually a hopeful and optimistic vision for the Middle East. And I'll end also with kind of laying this out further, because we have right now a contrast between that future hopeful vision of the Abraham Accords and the optimistic vision of the Middle East. And you have that in diametric opposition to something that Iran represents, which is a backwards looking vision of the Middle East. This gets into the anti-Semitism context in particular, because Ellie mentioned that one of the most potent elements of anti-Semitism, particularly in the Middle East, is anti-Zionism, and the belief that the Jewish people should not have not only the right to self-determination, but also to have that in the historical land of Israel. And this is no more predominant than in the Islamic Republic's ideology. And their fixation on Israel, which you can see in 2017, they actually set up a clock, a doomsday clock, counting down to when Israel was to be destroyed. And and Ayatollah Khamenei says it'll be destroyed in 2040. So maybe Hamas was a little too preemptive on October 7th, but they're looking for in 15 years Israel to be destroyed. But the view here is that Israel must be destroyed for the Islamic Republic for its ideology to export the revolution. And why is this? And this gets to the crux of a lot of the conflict, quote unquote, in the Middle East when it comes to Israel, is because they're viewing Israel as antithetical to their own worldview. Meaning, what is Israel to not only to the world effectively? Israel is the land of the world's historic refugees, the Jewish people. For 2,000 years, Jews were refugees the world over. The reestablishment of Jewish sovereignty in the state of Israel in 1948 showed that Jews can actually stand up for themselves now and have their own sovereignty and have their own state and have their own army and fight back. And most countries in the Middle East, Iran in particular, Iran after the revolution, 1979, they saw this and they said, well, if the survivors of the Shoah, the survivors of the Holocaust can come back, and even these lowly, pitiful refugees can create a state, and we cannot defeat them with 7 countries attacking them at one time in 1948, 1949. And we can't defeat them again in 1956. We can't defeat them again with 3 armies attacking them in 1967 and 1973, et cetera, et cetera. Then what good what does that say about us as a society? And more predominantly, what's that say about Islam and our relation to God? Because the Islamic Republic came into power saying we're going to export the revolution, that our view of Islam and our relation to God with our theocracy is predominant, it's supreme. But the antithesis to that is the existence of the state of Israel. Because the world's refugees, and after 1948, the region's refugees, over 800,000 Jews were kicked out of Middle Eastern and North African lands to go to Israel or elsewhere in the world. If the state of the world's refugees can not be defeated, what's it say about our faith as Muslims, as our faith, and as us as an Islamic Republic? So the idea that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism is obviously it's false, contradictory on its face. But in the Middle East, that is the animating ethos. So there's 2 routes again in the Middle East right now. There's the Islamic Republic of Iran route, which has the proxy organizations around Israel, which wants to return to a earlier age of Islamic supremacy. Or you have the Abraham Accords route, which offers prosperity and economic potential and a future for not only Israel, but also other Arab countries in the region.
Thank you, Daniel. Just one more short question on the Abraham Accords. Would you agree, or would you agree with a proposition that, in a way, the success of the Abraham Accords, when they were approved, sort of, well, in a way, the word provoked is not the correct one, but in a way provoked Iran to start the onslaught on Israel in 2023 on part of Hamas, because they saw finally that their strategies collapsing completely?
It's not a direct correlation, because the Abraham Accords is not a military security alliance. It might evolve to that. There are ideas, something called the Middle East Strategic Alliance, that could evolve in terms of Arab countries with Israel, developing some more formal security ties. But it's really a economic, commercial, trade, cultural alliance or relations. The precipitating factor to Hamas's October 7th attack. Well, first off, Iran and Hamas and Hezbollah never needed a reason to want to attack Israel. It is in Hamas's charter to destroy Israel. It is part of Hezbollah's reason. It was created in the 1970s and the 80s. And Iran, as I mentioned, it's central to its theology, its ideology beginning back in from 1979. So there's no precipitating factor that required Hamas to attack on October 7th. But there were, you can look at different indications. For example, that September, just a month before, you had Mohammed bin Salman and Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, both stating that relations with Saudi Arabia and Israel were progressing nicely, that normalization, again, was a question of when, not if. So there was certainly a view that maybe Yahya Sinwar, the now deceased head of Hamas, chose October 7th, or chose that fall to kind of derail those talks and that opportunity. But to say that the Abraham Accords was a direct reason why Iran decided to attack Israel, I think it's a little far-fetched. But again, it's kind of the indication there that that closer ties with Israel and other Arab countries does pose a threat and a concern to the Iranian Republic.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. Let us now jump into the more the domestic part of the contemporary anti-Semitism, political anti-Semitism. And I will now ask Peter a question, and Daniel, of course, is free to react. Peter, how would you assess the contemporary anti-Semitism in Europe? Would you say that the intensification of the contemporary anti-Semitism in Europe is part of the even more troubling phenomena that we see in Europe with the general radicalization in the political field, and of course these absolutely, I would agree, fundamental frictions that we experience in European societies that Ellie outlined.
Well, let me first of all thank you again very much for this opportunity. Ellie and Ellie unfortunately has left. I would love to have you here on European soil. Maybe next time there's an opportunity. I will not for the first time comment on the developments in the Middle East, because from a European perspective, I could add a lot of things or a lot of failures we did, and I doubt whether we have a Middle East policy which deserves that name, but that would lead us to a totally different discussion. Back indeed to your question. Well, first of all, I cannot deny that as a German, the fight against anti-Semitism is part of my political identity. But now, having moved to Brussels, I would like to add some topics from the European perspective, because, as you correctly pointed out, there are much more things at stake which go beyond a narrow understanding of anti-Semitism. I would like to embed it into a wider debate of radicalization and of hate speech, which is also one of the topics we put on the table today. And this is not by surprise, by the way. This rise of anti-Semitism is part of I would call it in a very neutral way, a radical transformation of our political systems and the public discourse in Europe. And we will not be able to understand nor to fight against anti-Semitism if we have not fully understand what are the roots and the dynamics of these groundbreaking developments, which have started 2 decades, 3 decades ago. We have not fully acknowledged sufficiently, I would say, but now we see the fruits of these developments, and it's a bit linking also what my dear panelist in the last panel mentioned. So I decided to talk a bit about 3 topics which sometimes are not immediately linked to anti-Semitism, but if you look a bit beyond the veil, you see there are a lot of linkages and they create and contribute to this dynamic. The first is indeed what I call the ambiguity of historical memory. We had this topic in the last session. Then the second point is the formation, or rather deformation, of public discourse. Democracies live from a certain kind of public discourse. If you destroy that, you end up where we are. And then the other thing, and we are very much concerned about that, is this global rise of authoritarian regimes. And we have already heard about how they use and abuse these kind of elements. Well, let me start with this ambiguity of historical memory. The fight, what is memory, what is history, has massively gained dynamics in the last years, both on the national level and on the European level. And I'm not talking about extreme cases such as in Russia, with the intention also to de-link from European history. We have enough cases inside the European Union and in our Western societies to build upon. Talking about anti-Semitism or the culmination in the Holocaust, there are different developments and even different strains of argumentation, though there's not one master story. Having said this, it doesn't make the things easier if you have to fight against different ideological roots. And you pointed out that we have a large and wide history of different argumentations. Let me start with the right-wing populist movements in Europe. The interesting thing, I'm a bit in contrast to what you normally read about these movements. Many of them are not showing an open, outright anti-Semitism. That is simply not true, at least if it comes to the official or the organizational level of the parties. Nor, frankly speaking, to the larger part, anti-Semitism per se is not a factor in the voting decisions of many of those voters. We have no empirical proof for that. It's a bit contrary to the dominating narrative, but we have to stick to the facts. However, the more interesting issue in this case is if you look a bit deeper into the ideology, the narratives, and not least the language, we can identify several issues which then give us a kind of idea how it is related to anti-Semitic and traditional anti-Semitism, because some of the figures in the second layer are very close. Let me give you two examples to explain that. One is the idea of a national or ethnic homogeneity, that there is one people, and I think in your region this has been a discourse since the first national movements in the 19th century. It has largely emerged among the right-wing populist parties, of course, with this anti-migrant, also sometimes anti-Islam discourse. But we know these kind of debates and discourses and the danger of these kind of discourses very much from the history of anti-Semitism. That's literally the same structure of arguments. That means excluding parts of the society. It's a standard operation on all extremist forces, be it the left or the right. And once you have established one case, you can apply this easily and often, unfortunate history to other minorities. So this is a very dangerous figure. I would like to call it an exclusive thinking, and this is absolutely contrast to our idea of an open and diverse European society. So it has much more implications than just against anti-Semitic roots. The old friends, and you've referred to that, are very well known. It's an anti-liberal, it's an anti-Western, it's an anti-capitalist notion. And here, unfortunately, left and right extremists often align. The example of Hungary, I think, has already been mentioned. Now with the visit of Netanyahu these days in Budapest, Hungary claims, or the ruling party claims, as the best and closest friends of Israel. But if you look into the language of the propaganda of the Hungarian government, I'm very sorry, there is an anti-Semitic context. If you have ever studied the iconography of anti-Semitic propaganda from the 19th century, and you arrive at the Budapest airport and see this anti-Soros or anti-European, they're often together, by the way, I cannot help, it's the same language we have been used for decades or centuries even. So, and they are very well aware, by the way, what they are using in terms of coding and visualization. So I don't accept any kind of excuses in this respect. And then the third is indeed an old exercise, what I would like to call relativization. In Germany, we have the AfD, which called the Third Reich and the Holocaust a fly shit. It's insane by people who are learned historians and trained historians, but I leave that. But there are other factors and other arguments we have seen in the context. One say, well, this is an unavoidable issue of transformation of history and of culture, of remembrance. We touched upon that topic before, but we have to clearly state that there are core values rooted in Judeo-Christian heritage, and they are undisputable. We have to strongly fight against any kind of relativism. This is the entrance of any kind, and we have to fight and defend our interpretation of history, which does not mean, by the way, to not think about new ways of interpreting, to link it with modern developments, but this is not giving up or relativizing in any way the core lessons we have learned so far. This is very important if we talk about the second topic. That means what has changed in our public discourse. And I do not hesitate to tell you that we are unfortunately going through a kind of revolutionary or even fatal transformation of our public discourse. One element of these changes, and I leave the media side out of this, is a fragmentation of the public sphere. You know, thinking about theory of democracy and democratic societies, we assume there is what we call public space. It's the old idea tracing back into antique. They have use the Greek word of agora, that is a common place where people meet and discuss. That's basically, if you leave all other issues around, that's the core idea, what differentiates democracy from other authoritarian forms. Now we see sliding back into bubbles, into little spaces, and radicalization is, by the way, one of the issues. So if you then add to this polarization the very dangerous issue of alternative facts and truths, that means giving up the very idea that we can achieve a kind of truth, maybe not absolute truth in a theological or philosophical way, but at least assume that by public discourse, by applying scientific methods, we come at least closer. That's the Kantian idea. So, and if we give up that element as well, then we are helpless. Then there is no way and no method to create a rational discourse. So keeping this momentum of a rational public discourse is something which we have to see. I've mentioned a bit the right side of the political spectrum, but let's not forget that on the left side, we see as well very fatal issues. And it has already been mentioned as well. We see a dangerous melange, a mixture of traditional anti-Semitic, anti-Zionistic, then you refer to that, and anti-colonialist arguments. And well, I live in Belgium. We have a large, very pro-Palestine community. I can tell you the debate is very feared, both in the public spaces as well as in the universities. So apparently this resonates still very much, and many governments have been quite lazy, I must tell you, in actively engaging and against. In Germany, we had our cases as well in the university, and I'm very disappointed, by the way, by many of the leaders of different institutions to not have a clearer stand on these issues, in contrast to what they normally praised and considered themselves as an issue. I close with a third point, but we cannot omit this issue. That's the global authoritarian discourse. And that is an existential threat for our liberal system. We see the developments again on both sides of the political spectrum. So far, we normally focus on Russia, on China and its allies. Some of them have been mentioned in the Middle East. It's a very sad development that some developments in the United States are not very helpful in this respect to promote democracy. We have to see how this development and this relationship will develop. We hope that the United States still remain a beacon of democracy promotion across the world. But we see a lot of unholy alliances from outside and inside the European Union. They undermine an existential consensus which we have built up after the Second World War and post-Holocaust experience. That is what still makes us Europeans and we as Christian Democrats or conservatives are very much aware that these attacks are not only dedicated, so to say, to anti-Semitism. They attack a lot of other policy fields and undermining the very basis of this issue, because they are fundamentally aiming at reinterpreting key ideas, key concepts of our, as I mentioned, Judeo-Christian heritage and the lessons of the 20th century. They weaken and they delegitimize democratic processes and even our history and the memories. So, closing that, we see, and we have just recently conducted a study on the political attitudes and values of the younger generation, and particularly on young men, and we see a tremendous the rise and being inclined to the siren songs of authoritarian leadership, traditional values, whatever this means, and a stable order, which is not a democratic order, it's an authoritarian order. So it has massive impacts on the wider stability of the systems. That's why I tried to put anti-Semitism in a wider picture, wider systemic change. And if we are not fighting against that, the very project of the European Union we had been proud and we can be proud is itself at stake. And so that is much more than just anti-Semitism, which is alone a disaster. But I would like to put it in a wider, is to really acknowledge what task we are up to solve. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much. I just want to announce that you are already welcome to make your comments or questions. I'll have one more. Yeah, okay. We'll have one. Just one question for Daniel. Coming back to the United States, and I'm really glad that Peter mentioned this point on the challenge, I would say, within Europe that the circles of conservative of Christian Democrats, of people who affiliate themselves with conservative ideas, that they should be, well, not necessarily proud, but they should know what they are, and we should acknowledge our Judeo-Christian not only heritage, but the way of life that we are living here in our Western societies. That we should be proud about that. Daniel, just after October 7th attacks, we saw those absolutely terrible scenes in the campuses in the United States. We saw that in European Union too. Gladly enough, we haven't seen anything like that in Lithuania and Vilnius. But yes, for example, I remember those scenes from the Columbia University where people, the Jewish students, Jewish personnel were, well, not only so-called psychologically abused, but physically abused. And how would you assess this current situation of in the United States about this both public discourse and the environment, general environment of anti-Semitism? Daniel.
Well, this question deserves a conference all into its own. So in a minute or two, I guess I'll try to say that one thing I think we're facing in the West, and I say United States, much of Europe, I think you're right. I've not seen stories coming out of Lithuania about this, which is a good thing. But Australia, basically the West more broadly, we're facing an ideology, individuals, organizations, and ideology that fundamentally wants to destroy Western civilization. And they are using, Ellie's talked about the tsunami that came out after October 7th. And it's very true because you have organizations and individuals and some countries that are fomenting this because they're using the October 7th attack on Israel, and they're using supposedly pro-Palestinian talking points or agenda or a veneer of being pro-Palestinian to really be anti-Israel, to be anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist. And ultimately, their goal is most people here in the United States don't know when they chant from the river to the sea what river or what sea they're talking about. It's probably the same way in Europe. These people are useful idiots. And those people we should take in consideration, but not realize that they are not the ones fomenting this. It's organizations that are supporting them and wealthy individuals. Frankly, George Soros is one of those individuals, and through his organization that is fomenting a lot of this. But this ideology is trying to attack American society, I think European society, Western civilization more broadly. So this is not just an American issue. It's not just a Jewish issue. Ellie said they first come for us, but they never end with us. And I'm Jewish, but we say first they come for the Saturday people, then they come for the Sunday people, the Christians. So it's not just, it's largely predominantly in America right now on the left with progressive ideology that are supported by Islamist ideologies and organizations as well. And I think you're seeing that across Europe too. So we have to realize that the goal is not to change American or European policy towards Israel. The goal is not to see some sort of Palestinian state. The goal is very clear, and they're clear in a lot of their propaganda and their talking points. The goal is to destroy Western civilization.
Yeah. We had this term during our conference here, Daniel, the learned anti-Semitism, when the public intellectuals who are on the paper, they are in fear of their land, they are in the universities or in the think tanks, they have these mantras on anti-Semitism. But yes, but I would definitely agree with this wider onslaught. I just remember that, and we should remember, just after 9/11, after 2001 attacks in New York, how some of European intellectuals interpreted the thing, what had happened. I remember Jürgen Habermas and Jacques Derrida wrote the text that America has nothing but itself to blame for these kind of attacks, and they wrote these kind of pieces just days after the most terrible attacks on the United soil. Peter,
just a short comment. Well, we bear the fruits, so to say, of development of decades of rottening also the university system to an extent. It is not longer an open space of debate, of a rational debate. It becomes really, unfortunately, the breeding ground for certain ideologies. We had been always blinded on certain eyes. The migration issue, yes, has to be mentioned. We import it. I can fully agree with Ellie. This is an issue which we shied away. Among the very large disaster of European migration policy, which, by the way, also unethical in many ways. But this is another debate we could continue. So we have weakened these institutions already years before. That's just the latest wave, latest step in diminishing. And if they are not able to heal, to recover, and to go back to their original function as a place of rational discourse, we cannot omit this system, because then we can create and should create maybe new forms of creating our new intellectual elite. The old universities, we had been proud in the Middle Ages, are not longer serving to a large extent this very purpose.
Okay, Professor Valentinavicius, have your question? Yes, I think this mic should work. Okay. Yes.
Thank you very much for your contributions. It was very interesting. My question concerns a issue of imported anti-Semitism and homegrown one. Ellie made a very passionate point about the danger of imported by migrants anti-Semitism in Europe. And Peter is talking about homegrown Semitism. We here in Lithuania, we have two anti-Semitic parties, limited presence of them in our parliament. And at the same time, they are strongly anti-immigrant. And at the same time, they declare their love for Mr. Donald Trump. We see in Germany, basically, the situation is the same. Alternative für Deutschland is latently or sometimes openly anti-Semitic party. And they are strongly anti-immigrant. And at the same time, we hear in Munich how G.D. Vance encouraged German people to vote for basically AfD. Same was done by Elon Musk. So I cannot, it's very difficult for me to understand how it goes with this strategy of robust support for Israel, which I approve very much. But don't you see here a risk of allying with anti-Semitic forces in Europe to fight this imported anti-Semitism? What you can say about that?
So this is a question for Daniel Flesch. Okay, and Peter, you have. So Daniel, you're up to a task. Oh, that was a long question. Okay, so I'll try to summarize in a nutshell, yeah? But this is Professor Valentinavich's words, not mine. So is that generally, in a nutshell, Professor Valentinavich said that while current administration is actively supporting Israel, which Professor Valentinavich approves 100%, the current administration too plays with the anti-Semitic forces within Europe. Alternative für Deutschland, the German radical right party, or the comments by Elon Musk recently, or the J.D. Vance in Munich Security Conference, where they expressed their support for Alternative for Deutschland. So what Professor Valentinavic said, that there's a, well, not a paradox, but there's a lack of integrity with these two poles within the current administration. So that is quite a provocative, but I must say important question.
Certainly, with the obvious caveat that I do not speak for the administration. I'll say a couple things. One is, and I'm not an expert on German politics or AfD, but I think what this administration is trying to do is have our allies and partners stand up for themselves. And this is something Israel is doing, obviously, every day, and they ask for American support in certain ways, but Israel's a country that wants to fight on its own and fight for itself. And I think you have this administration pushing back against forces, progressive forces that have been effectively powerful here. If Kamala Harris had won, would have been ascendant here in the United States. And similar, trying to find individuals or organizations or parties in Europe that are also willing to push against similar forces. And so I think you have to take each situation on its own. But the comments with Vice President Vance in Munich at the security conference a couple of months ago, I think is indicative, again, to this administration wants, particularly our European allies, to fight for themselves. We want to help them. We want to support them. We want them to fight for themselves. And so this comes back to a conversation about defense spending for NATO membership, to be part of NATO, et cetera, et cetera. And I think they want to find other organizations, allies in Europe that are willing to do that. And so I don't think these are two necessarily at odds with each other. I think that it's part of a common thing that this president wants America, has an American first policy, and he would not bemoan any European country to have their own Lithuanian, German, et cetera, first policy that collectively within NATO is also a European first policy, because they want, again, it's not that the United States does not want to help support and defend NATO, but they want NATO member states to be able to do that themselves effectively. And they see in Israel an ally that is doing that currently.
Yes, thank you. Peter.
Well, two issues. Immediately to your comment, I didn't understand why my dear colleagues in Munich, the European one, get paled after G.D. Vance's speech. There was nothing really new. Had you precisely followed the discourse in the United States and what you have demanded, maybe in a more polite way over at least a decade or even longer back, you know what your work has to be done, and we didn't do it. So you're right. We are potent enough to defend our own territory. We are extremely glad what the United States did and do, by the way. They are not withdrawing. They give us not only the nuclear umbrella, but many other capabilities. It's up to us now to stand on our own feet. We have to become mature. We lived in very pleasant times over 70 years. Now it's time, and we are economically very competent. It's a lack of political will at the very end. And sometimes, apparently, you need clap people very harsh, that they wake up. I think we did it. Now, we have learned our lessons, and you will see a dramatic change over the next years, both in the identity of Europe and the real capabilities. So this is not the part I'm very much concerned. I don't comment on the interventions of Musk and Vance in terms of specific political parties. Well, I'm much more relaxed on that, frankly speaking. First of all, I don't think that has dramatically changed the voting behavior. The people had already made up their decisions. And again, what had we heard before the US elections? I think there had been many voices in Europe who, well, had a clear idea who should become the next president. I consider this, frankly speaking, as a massive interference in the decision of the American people. It's up to them. You're a democracy, excuse me. I cannot see why we are now very much upset that some interfere on European soil. We did it the very same the other way around. So look to your mirror sometimes before blaming others. I'm not in support of those extremist forces, definitely not, but we should be very careful in judging others before not having done our own work.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Peter. Do we have any more questions or remarks or comments? We have one, please, go to the mic. Could you present yourself?
My name is Gedali Mendelevich. I'm from Antwerp, Belgium, a representative of the international Jewish community.
Okay. So please have your question.
My question is to Peter and to Daniel. There is a party, it's called the Vlaams Belang in Belgium. It's a Flemish party, and basically there's today Jewish people who they say openly to support them and to vote for this party, even that the party, they are originally, it was Holocaust collaborators who established the party, and basically now Jewish people say we should vote for them because they support Israel and they support the Jewish interests more than the other left-wing parties or the white center parties. Or my question is, if you think so, that's the right decision and the move to do now, because even certain people say that they're still anti-Semitic and they still hate Jewish people and they're just trying to get Jewish votes, and that's it.
Okay, Daniel, did you hear the question at this? Okay, by the way, Antwerp is one of the most beautiful cities in the whole Europe. My sister lives in Antwerp, so I'm very glad that you're here. Yes, so if you would like to react, Daniel, perhaps you could start.
My apologies, but I'm not familiar with the party, the specifics of this election. But I will say that from Jewish history, we know that Jews are often in unfortunate situations where they have to choose the lesser of two evils to survive. It's a whole relationship how Jews, as again the world's refugees and as often subjugated minorities in countries around the world, have related to power. And so I look at it right now where if your house is on fire, do you want to side with the arsonist, or do you want to side with the firefighter who might be kind of have unfortunate proclivities or opinions? And the fact is, when your house is on fire, you want to go with the firefighter and maybe figure out the day after what actually the route to engage with that person is about. And I see right now that for Jews in Europe, and this is obviously painted with a broad brushstroke, Jews in Europe, our house is on fire in many ways in the United States here, but it's been averted since the election of Donald Trump. But right now, I think you want to go with the parties, again, not about the specifics of this situation, that are not there chanting for your destruction in the streets of your own home city, which oftentimes on the left we're seeing in broad places is actually happening. But it's an unfortunate predicament, so I can't speak specifically to this example, but yet, again, I think you want to go with the organizations and those individuals who are wanting to defeat the same enemies you have right now, which are putting your house on fire.
Okay, Peter.
Well, it's a sad development that they rely on those forces, but I can say, at least for my political movement, the European People's Party, our stand for Israel is without any doubt, and we have mentioned that several times. This is written on all the manifesto, so this is part of our identity. Along the wider spectrum, across the wider spectrum, there are not so clear positions towards Israel. That's an issue we have to fight politically. And again, what I mentioned before, anti-Semitism is not the crucial factor for voting decisions, even among the majority of the voters of the Vlaams Belang or to other right-wing. There are other grievances which are the real factors, economic ones, cultural ones. We have no empirical proof that anti-Semitism is a major decisive factor for voting for these parties. Yet remains our task to gain these forces back, to come up with convincing answers. That is a truly political challenge, and we can have no excuses of not doing it.
Okay, yes, and the last question from my part, on which we will conclude not only our panel, but our conference. Daniel and Peter, what should a comprehensive American and European strategy should look like in countering Iran and supporting Israel? Daniel.
Again, we need another conference on this. I'd say for Iran specifically, it is very specific. In a few months, snapback sanctions need to be imposed on the Iranian regime through the United Nations that need to be done. The Iranians cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon, so anything to support President Trump's maximum pressure campaign with financial pressure right now should be done. While on a related note, everything should be done to support the Iranian dissidents inside the country. That's one thing. On Israel, again, I think we need to, I have a lot to say about Europe and the EU as it relates to Israel. Most of it is not good. So, I mean, I'd say here in a sentence or two, drop the Palestinians as a primary motivating factor for engaging with the region, engaging with Israel. Realize that Israel provides solutions to not only Middle Eastern problems, but also many European problems. And ultimately, Israel is a country that can, wants to, and is standing on its own. And at the end of the day, Israel is fighting, and I served in the IDF over 10 years ago. Israel is fighting on the front lines of the same forces that are now embedded in Europe. So their fight is our fight, and our fight is their fight. And if we recognize that from a moral perspective, then everything else, politics, economics, et cetera, can follow. But is it unequivocally standing with Israel, not just rhetorically, but actually with all the elements of statecraft that we can muster?
Yes, yes, and Daniel just mentioned the level of expertise in terms of defense security that Israel can provide. Just on the last Wednesday, Israel Embassy in Vilnius organized a tremendous forum and the conference on the Israel's defense capabilities, and there were companies and startups who showed the whole high-tech military programs and actions that they can provide with their absolutely extreme expertise that they have. Peter, your take.
Well, following up what you mentioned, Daniel, Europe has no Middle East strategy, frankly speaking. These are pieces. We ignored tremendous developments. I'm currently writing an article with an Israeli colleague on the Indian, Mediterranean, Middle East, Europe corridor. This is an interesting development of economic zone. You and Ellie referred also to the perspective of well-being, of wealth creation as one of the major roots of the conflict. So these are the strategic dimensions we have to see. In terms of Israel, I think the support is unwavered. We have also to acknowledge that Hamas has taken even the Palestinian people as hostages for decades. We completely ignored that. We poured billions of euro into terroristic structures. I cannot help. And nobody is really acknowledging. This is always covered with this ethical, humanitarian aspect. This is ridiculous. It's quite the contrary. And we have to put these things on the table and critically reflect what went wrong also from our side. Let aside the problem that we are not united among the European member states on how to proceed. I just mentioned Spain and other countries, which is not very helpful. Yet put it in a wider strategic issue. And you touched upon the defense issue. If we talked, and when we had this interview this morning about the future of the European defense industry, we cannot imagine it without Israel being part of that common effort. I hope that the new procurement regulations on the European level will be open to Israel, to UK, even to the United States, because we have to be realistic. Even if we can upgrade this very quickly, we need the support, the technological knowledge, both of Israel and the United States, to be able to defend ourselves. So it is totally unrealistic to decouple from the United States. This is still the space we operate, and Israel, again, next to some nations in Asia, are the leading supplier in top-notch technologies. We will not be able to defend ourselves without a close alliance of Israel and their technological advancements.
Yes. Okay, so that's it. First of all, thank you, Daniel, for joining us this afternoon in Vilnius, and I think it's still morning in America, as they say in the great commercial by Ronald Reagan, right? Thank you, all of you. Thank you, Peter Hefele, for joining us in this panel, joining us for this whole day. I personally believe it was a success, but it's for you to evaluate. And yes, so just do follow our institute's activity. We will have many other events with our partners, with Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, with Wilfred Martin Center, with Heritage Foundation. Say hello to James Carafano if you'll see him somewhere in DC. Yes, and I wish all of you, and Daniel, you too, the most wonderful weekend. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.